I'm Joanne Uy. I am the producer of this festival, and I am pleased today to welcome Olivia Sudjic, who, as I mentioned before, a bit earlier, is one of the top young novelists of her generation. She has written 3 books: Sympathy, Exposure, and Asylum Road. This is Exposure, which is actually an essay, and this, Asylum Road, is her most recent novel. She has won a clutch of awards. I will read those.
No, it's fine.
No. Just to, so you can understand why we invited her, because she has yet to be translated in Albanian. But Arlinda, where's Arlinda? Okay, I think she's with Leah signing books, but I hope to see this book in Albanian soon. And I believe her books, they will be, because they are of a defining, creative, original quality. So, just please let me read some of your accolades. Okay, for Sympathy, it was a finalist for the Salerno European Book Award and Collier Bristow Prize in 2017. Exposure was named an Irish Times Evening Standard and White Review Book of the Year for 2018. Her follow-up novel, Asylum Road, was shortlisted for the Encore Award and the Gordon Bowker Volcano Prize in 2021. She's now working on a 3rd novel entitled The Termite Queen, which she's going to tell us a little bit about later in this interview. Now, because these novels are not available in Albanian yet, and because it's always more difficult to bring the audience into the world of a fiction writer without them having actually read the books, we're very lucky, and we're going to focus on this book, which is a personal essay, which was written after Olivia's first book, Sympathy. This book is called Exposure, and it basically talks about the anxiety that she experienced in the wake of getting her first book deal and a host of other issues. But I want to first let Olivia introduce herself to you. So Olivia, tell us a little bit about your writing, education, career, and why did you decide to even become a writer?
Oh, there's no good reason to become a writer. You sort of have to have exhausted all your other options and have really no other skills if you're going to choose it as a career. Hobby is a different thing. Thank you for that introduction. I didn't actually decide exactly. I knew I wanted to study literature, so that's what I did when I left school. And in a way, if I had, I used to write short stories as a teenager, obviously horrifically bad, I hope they never surface. But if I'd had a kind of nascent urge to write creatively, I think actually studying English at Cambridge did kind of kill that for a bit. Because if you are studying Shakespeare and, Virginia Woolf and, the canon, you don't really go home and think, I'm going to try that tonight. You sort of, in a nice way and in an incredibly stimulating way, you are deconstructing things, you are looking behind the scenes, you are working out how they did something. But for me personally, it didn't really inspire the confidence to write creatively. And at the same time, what I was learning to do was write academically, which is not to use your own voice, which is to, certainly at undergraduate level, to speak in a way with this impersonal authority that you're kind of borrowing from other critics by writing in their style and by kind of mimicking what is actually, at the time anyway, was certainly often a very male, objective-sounding academic voice. So when I graduated, I did not want to be writing novels. And also, I graduated into a recession, so I think my parents were like, don't do that. And instead, I thought maybe I'd go into documentaries, or maybe I would, there are lots of vultures hanging around Cambridge arts sort of students saying, become a lawyer, do a law conversion. So that was, I think, what my parents wanted me to do. But I think I sort of realized that having not got far enough up any career ladder, that it was safe actually to step off and take a year out and sort of rethink. I sort of thought, age 25, if I'm going to try this, it's got to be now before I have any kind of real responsibilities, certainly not children or a mortgage. And I had moved to New York for about 3 or 4 months, and this story sort of happened to me. That was my first novel. And
Tell us, just give us a brief synopsis of it.
So it was, I wrote it in 2014, edited it sort of 15, 16, and then it came out in 2017. And it's about that kind of nascent period of life online where, unlike now, I think, where everybody is very cautious and aware of what a kind of strange, parallel, but now totally overlapping world the online space is with our real one. It's about a kind of young woman who slightly loses herself online and becomes a stalker of someone else, in the way that it's actually very normalized online, that we all have access now to other people's lives in a way that previously was sort of unthinkable. It's almost like a kind of 21st century version of something like The Talented Mr. Ripley, where somebody starts to kind of absorb somebody else's personality and almost start to mimic them through what they can find, you know, not online in the case of Talented Mr. Ripley, but in my book, it is about what she can draw from somebody's social media and just online profile. And I guess the deeper theme of that is this idea of surveillance, the idea of that famous quote attributed often to Marshall McLuhan about we shape our tools and then after our tools shape us. This idea that she thinks she's in control of a situation using tools of surveillance, but actually those very tools are, as we now are all very familiar with, we are the product. That's surveillance capitalism, whereby your search terms, the things you put online are actually being used to turn you into a product. So it was a kind of book about that feeling of surveillance, which had crept into, at the time I was 25 and then 27 when it came out, which I feel was very common to people my age who'd just had a childhood pre-internet and then got their first email address maybe when they were sort of 13, 14, and it was something so embarrassing like sexystrawberry@hotmail.com, before we all had serious email addresses, and we realized that this footprint is there forever. Unlike, Gen Z now, who kind of are so aware of that and live life 100% aware of that performance. I think mine is the last generation who straddled both of those worlds of life pre-online and post. And it was sort of trying to reconcile with that feeling, which then leads quite, naturally to this exploration. You said it was about the anxiety of publishing my first book, and it is and was. But it's also about the anxiety of publishing a novel or creating any form of art, or really putting yourself out there in the world in any form, in an online world, in a digitally saturated world, where there are books. I felt like exposure needed to be written because there are books about what it means to be a writer from different periods. We have this image of this glamorous writer in their garret, or a kind of 70s writer, often they're male and doing lots of drugs and living a very glamorous lifestyle. But then, the worst that can happen really, let's say, is that a review gets published in a newspaper and then everyone sort of forgets about it. But when you're a novelist working in the age of the internet, not only does everything live forever, but also you become your product, expected to sell the book. And everything that you put online and everything you're expected to do is almost anathema to why I became a writer in the first place, was that I like to think and privately sit in my, not garret, but small room and be introspective. And the reason that I like to communicate through the medium of a novel is because it suits me much more than the immediacy, let's say, of Twitter or any of those forms of online life, which I very much, I'm not trying to be tinfoil hat here, like I am addicted to the internet, I'm not pretending not to be, and I made it a part of my work, not to see it as this, the internet is killing the novel, the internet is killing our attention spans, it's killing, all these things. I felt like the internet was seen as the problem and the novel as this separate thing, and I wanted to find a way to make literature confront novels rather than constantly set them in internet eras. And now that's commonplace, but when I started doing it, my publisher was like, do you really want to reference the internet in your novel? because this might be a flash in the pan thing. And I was like, yes, I do. Because we don't stop reading George Eliot because we talk about letters or, telegrams. It's a form of technology, but it's important to analyze in literature.
I think that what was interesting about your ambivalence, you have an ambivalent relationship with the internet. You embrace it on one hand, and even its anxiety because it fuels your creativity. On the other, obviously, it can be crippling, basically, the type of anxiety that it can cause. Now, I want to actually read a passage from your book, or you can read this passage from your book. Actually, let me read it because I have their portions. Escapism, conspiracy theories, exposure. These have become commonplace in the digital realm. A novelist must hover between her interior and exterior world, one eye trained on intimate detail, the other at a broader horizon. This is the bifocal gaze that social media nurtures as we learn to assimilate news of terror attacks alongside the birth of a friend's child. It comes with a particular emotional toll. So actually get into that a little bit, because what I found surprising about your dissection of feelings that your experiences with social media and the internet gave you is that they didn't echo a lot of the sentiments and complaints and criticisms of the internet, which were very prevalent, which are body image, envy, FOMO, fear of missing out, like the typical litany. Actually, you had a different set of concerns, which I thought was very interesting. So can you explain your personal relationship with the internet more?
So I think all of the things you just listed are important, but I think that they exist already offline, and the online world has sort of exacerbated and intensified those things. But I think there's something new about what the internet enables us to do in terms of communication that we couldn't do before, that it felt like there was a period of time in which no one was really concerned by it at all until it was sort of too late and the Pandora's box had been opened, and then retroactively trying to get it back in the bag. And, there are so many technology companies that began with mottos like move fast and break things, and this general attitude that you could ask for, forgiveness rather than permission. And it felt like that world, and it's still very much dominated by white men, and that this universe was being created, as this sort of, it now feels almost so obvious when you look at who's running Twitter and the kind of world in which women or any marginalized group, but also anyone who values. Zadie Smith writes very well about valuing her right to be wrong, to live in a sort of more ambiguous space than the internet allows, to try ideas out. That is one of the things about academia, for example, that is so valuable. And we talked, or you mentioned earlier about the terminal decline of the value of the arts in, for example, the UK. And that famous line, if you're not from the UK, you won't be familiar with this, but there was an advertising campaign that was run basically saying people who work in the arts, their next job is actually going to be in cyber. They just don't know it yet. And that was supposed to be optimistic. And now, obviously, with AI and all of these forms in which we devalue kind of ambivalence, and we get more and more polarized, and the space in which there is to discuss in this sort of format becomes narrower and narrower. And it feels like everything I value about writing novels is threatened in lots of ways by the online world. But as you say, I'm ambivalent, because there are so many ways in which it also makes it that much more exciting as a challenge.
Do you feel like you're a better writer because of the internet? I think this is a simple but difficult question to answer, perhaps.
I feel like every generation of writers will have some new technology that generates a lot of panic. And I don't think it's entirely bad. It's like any technology, it depends what use it's put to and by whom. I think that the lack of oversight is worrying.
How about in your case, though?
In my particular case, I don't think I'm better because of the internet. Okay. But I think that I've been given the grist for my mill from the internet. I feel like it gave me For me to start wanting to write a book, I can't know the answer when I begin. I'm feeling my way through it. So it has to be enough of like a knotty problem that's relevant enough to me, but also feels that through that specific experience, I can access something more universal. But it has to be troubling me personally for me to begin. So the fact that the internet was troubling me personally meant that I wrote a novel. So I might not have written it without it, but I don't think it improves my writing.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, if I want to set a scene somewhere I've never been, I can get on Google Maps. That does help.
I mean, I think that the reason your novels or your books are incredible is they really embody the exact concerns of your generation. Now, you have transmuted that anxiety into a powerful creative force, and you have, in this book, Exposure, you state that many times, and I'll just read one quote among many. Responding to traumatic events, finding ways to live with fear and communicate is often what forms a writer's voice. You also say in your book that what you try to harness is also, or express, is fear.